Thank you, Mr. President. The photographs on this poster are of a young woman, Lori Jackson, a Connecticut resident, who died tragically, needlessly, savagely in Oxford at the hands of her estranged husband. Lori is the reason that I have introduced legislation named after her to close a gaping loophole in our federal law. Well, she's not really the only reason. Tragically, there are thousands of other women and some men who have shared her fate because of a gap in federal law that permits intimate partners to continue to have firearms, even when they are under restraining orders from the court. Those restraining orders are placed against them because they evidence clear danger to their partner, whether their husband or their spouse. And the reason that they pose danger is that they become violent. The gap in the law is that it applies only to permanent restraining orders, not temporary ones. And Lori Jackson sought a temporary restraining order when her estranged husband threatened her physically and her two 18-month-old twins at their home. She sought and she obtained a temporary restraining order, and literally the day before that temporary restraining order was to become permanent and the prohibition against her husband having a firearm would have gone into effect, he gunned her down at her parents' home where she had sought refuge with her children. Gunned her down and savagely and severely wounded her mother as well with those same firearms. The temporary restraining order against Lori's husband was completely ineffective, powerless, to prevent him from using that gun against her to kill her and her mother, severely wounding her. Tragically, Lori's story is far from unique. Jasmine Leonard also had a temporary protection order against her husband. She died last week after her husband shot her. China Joy Young celebrated her 18th birthday just days before she was shot and killed by her estranged boyfriend, despite the temporary restraining order she had against him. Young was 3 months pregnant. Barbara Diane Dye was granted a temporary restraining order and then fled to Texas. She returned only for a hearing on the permanent restraining order, and that's when her husband cornered her in a bank parking lot and shot her repeatedly with a .357 Magnum revolver, killing her there. When domestic abusers have access to firearms, it isn't just abuse victims who are at risk. A violent husband under a temporary restraining order in Brookfield, Wisconsin, followed his wife to the salon where she worked. Not only did he shoot and kill his wife, but he killed 2 additional people and wounded 4 more. After Erica Bell got a temporary restraining order against her husband, he came to her at church. He followed her there. He shot and killed Erica, and he also shot 4 of her relatives, including her grandparents, great aunt, and a cousin. This scourge of domestic violence, combined with the epidemic of guns in our society causing gun violence, is a toxic recipe. As our former colleague Frank Lautenberg used to say, the difference between a murdered wife and a battered wife is a gun. Women are 5 times more likely to die as a result of domestic violence when there is a gun in the home than when there is not. So I've introduced the Lori Jackson Domestic Violence Survivor Protection Act. It's a long name. The most important part of the name is Lori Jackson because her story really tells it all. There is no reason that we should fail to protect women when they are protected by a temporary restraining order rather than a permanent restraining order. In fact, there is every reason to provide more protection in the first week or 2 weeks when there is a temporary restraining order in place. Remember, the temporary restraining order is granted not on a whim or a question. It's granted because of specific, credible evidence that an intimate partner poses a physical danger. And it's granted by a judge after considering that evidence. The moment of danger in a relationship like Lori Jackson is when one partner tells another, it may be a spouse, it may be a boyfriend, girlfriend, she's leaving. She wants a divorce. It's over. That is the moment of maximum rage. That is the moment of greatest danger. That is the moment of uncontrollable wrath. At that moment of greatest danger, the law is at its weakest. There is no prohibition against that enraged, impulsive, hurt, angry individual from continuing to possess or purchase a firearm. The Lori Jackson Domestic Violence Survivor Protection Act very simply closes that gaping loophole in our law, providing that just as with a permanent protective order, an individual subject to a temporary restraining order cannot purchase or possess a firearm. Very simple, common sense measure, but it can help save lives. It can help save others like Lori Jackson and the individuals whom I have named, many of them courageous and strong individuals like Lori Jackson who broke with an abusive relationship. The experts in this field will tell you that is among the most difficult things to do. And it puts a woman at her most vulnerable point in the relationship. And again, that is the time when current law fails her. That is the reason that we should close that loophole. Other measures are also important and necessary. I want to salute our colleague, Senator Klobuchar, for her proposal that will close an equally important loophole in our law relating to people who are convicted of stalking. That is an eminently important and sensible step to take. It would keep guns out of the hands of stalkers. Likewise, Representative Moore's legislation to help states enforce our gun laws. And similarly, the comprehensive measure of mental health initiatives, school safety steps, background checks, part of a comprehensive effort to stop gun violence in our country. They are all important and necessary, and I want to thank my colleague and friend, Senator Murphy of Connecticut, for championing them as a teammate in this effort, and he has joined me in supporting this legislation. I named this legislation after Lori Jackson as a memorial to her and a gesture of sadness and outrage at her death. Every man or woman who has lost his or her life to a domestic violence gun homicide deserves to be memorialized on this floor, as does every victim of gun violence. With more than 1,000 names added as victims every year I believe that we can honor them best by passing this legislation. And I urge my colleagues to join with me in honoring Lori Jackson, Jasmine Leonard, China Joy Young, Barbara Diane Dye, Zena Daniel, all the men and women who have lost their lives to domestic abusers and whose lives might have been saved. We can't know for sure. There's no certainty that they would be alive today. But we know their chances would have been better if that temporary protective order had also protected them from an abuser who possessed or bought a firearm at that moment of maximum danger. But action is the best way to honor the memory of the victims of gun violence. Action to adopt common sense, sensible measures that will help prevent gun violence in the future. And none is more important than honoring and remembering and acting to save others like Lori Jackson, who will always be with us in spirit and memory. And I thank the colleagues who have joined me in this effort, Senator Durbin, Murray, Boxer, Murphy, Hirono, Warren, Menendez, who have joined in sponsoring the Lori Jackson Domestic Violence Survivor Protection Act. And I thank the chair.